Chapter 1: The Whispering Walls. The house has always watched me. I know that sounds insane, the kind of drivel spewed by lunatics in padded rooms, but I swear it's true. It's not a malevolent gaze, not exactly, more of a patient observation. A silent, knowing presence that has permeated my life for as long as I can remember. My name is Elias Thorne, and I'm a historian. Or I was a historian. Now I'm more of a recluse, a prisoner of my own crumbling inheritance. This house, Thorne Manor, a Gothic monstrosity perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the churning Atlantic, is the reason. It's the keeper of my secrets, the architect of my nightmares. Before I descended into this, well, whatever this is, I lectured at a respectable university specializing in the history of the occult, particularly the darker corners of the Victorian era. Irony, isn't it? A scholar of the macabre now living inside his own Gothic novel. Ironic and predictably tragic. It all started with my grandfather's death. A reclusive man, as prone to solitude as the rest of us Thorns, he passed away quietly in his sleep, leaving me the manor. I hadn't seen him in years, not since my parents died in a car accident when I was a teenager. He wasn't a warm man, grandfather, but he was family. And besides, Thorne Manor was a trove of historical documents. My inheritance wasn't just a house. It was a research library, a labyrinth of forgotten lore. The drive to the manor after the funeral was unnerving. The GPS kept glitching, rerouting me down increasingly narrow and overgrown roads. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of salt and something else, something acrid like burnt offerings. The sky, typically a brilliant blue, was a bruised purple, mirroring the anxiety blooming in my chest. Even the sun seemed reluctant to shine on Thorne Manor. When I finally arrived, the house loomed before me, a skeletal silhouette against the twilight sky. It was larger than I remembered, its dark stone walls scarred by time and weather. Gargoyles perched on the roof, their grotesque faces leering down at me. The windows were dark, empty eyes staring into my soul. The front door, a massive oak affair studded with iron, groaned open as I inserted the key, as if exhaling a sigh that had been held for decades. The interior was colder than outside, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of mildew. Shadows danced in the corners of the vast entrance hall, obscuring details and playing tricks on my eyes. Grandfather had left everything as it was. Furniture draped in white sheets, cobwebs clinging to chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced Thorns lining the walls, their eyes seemingly following my every move. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. I spent the first few days cataloging the library, a task that quickly became an obsession. The room was a treasure trove, filled with first editions of forbidden texts, handwritten journals detailing arcane rituals, and maps charting forgotten ley lines. It was a scholar's dream, and I was lost in it. That's when the whispering started. At first, I dismissed it as the wind whistling through cracks in the walls, or the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears from exhaustion. But the whispers persisted, growing clearer, more distinct. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a chorus of hushed voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand, yet somehow felt in my bones. They were subtle at first, barely audible like the rustling of leaves in a distant forest. But they grew in intensity, becoming more insistent, more personal. They seemed to know my name, to whisper my anxieties, my fears, my darkest desires. Elias, they'd murmur, their voices a blend of male and female, young and old, human and something else. Elias, we know what you seek. I tried to ignore them, to rationalize them away as auditory hallucinations brought on by stress and isolation. But the whispers were relentless, weaving themselves into the fabric of the house, becoming an inseparable part of its atmosphere. One night, I was poring over a particularly disturbing journal, detailing a series of ritualistic murders that had taken place in the manor centuries ago. The whispers were particularly loud that night, a cacophony of voices swirling around me, driving me to the edge of madness. Suddenly, the journal slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent library. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, but I was alone. The whispers subsided, replaced by an unnerving silence. Then I saw it. A figure standing in the shadows at the far end of the library. Tall and gaunt, shrouded in darkness, its features obscured by the gloom. It was there for only a fleeting moment, a flicker in the corner of my eye, but I saw it. I felt it. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of books. The figure remained motionless, watching me. I scrambled to my feet and fled the library, slamming the door shut behind me. I ran through the dark hallways, my breath catching in my throat, the whispers chasing me. I didn't stop running until I reached my bedroom, a small, sparsely furnished room on the second floor. I slammed the door shut, locking it and barricading it with a heavy oak desk. I huddled in the corner of the room, my body trembling, listening for any sign of the figure. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was even more terrifying. It felt pregnant with anticipation, as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed. The sun began to rise, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The fear began to subside, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. Had I imagined it all? Was I truly losing my mind? I cautiously opened the door and peered out into the hallway. It was empty. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. The house seemed normal. I ventured back to the library, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was as I had left it, the books scattered on the floor, the journal lying open on the desk. There was no sign of the figure. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself that it had been a hallucination, a product of my overactive imagination and sleep deprivation. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I had seen something other. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. They were no longer just murmuring my name. They were calling me, beckoning me, promising me answers. Elias, come. We know what you seek. The truth is here within these walls. Come and we will show you. Sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned in bed, the whispers echoing in my mind. I knew I shouldn't listen to them, that they were dangerous, that they would lead me down a path from which there was no return. but I couldn't resist. Driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, I rose from bed and made my way back to the library. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. I hesitated for a moment, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. This was it, the point of no return. Once I crossed that threshold, there would be no going back. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The library was bathed in an eerie, ethereal glow. The books on the shelves seemed to pulsate with a strange energy. The whispers intensified, swirling around me, enveloping me in a cacophony of voices. And then I saw it. In the center of the room, a circle of light illuminated a figure standing before a large, ancient tome. The figure was tall and gaunt, shrouded in darkness, its features obscured by the shadows. But this time it wasn't a fleeting glimpse. This time it was real. The figure turned to face me, and a chilling smile spread across its face. "Welcome, Elias," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "We've been waiting for you." That's when I realized I wasn't just a historian anymore. I was a character in my own horror story, and the house was the puppeteer pulling the strings. And the worst part, I think a part of me always knew it would end this way. It's as though I were sleepwalking my entire life to this very precipice of doom. The house wanted something from me, and it was finally time to pay the piper. And I had a dreadful feeling of what that might entail. Something far, far worse than a simple haunting. This house wanted to consume me. Chapter 2: The Ritual Unveiled. The figure's words hung in the air, thick with menace and an ancient, unsettling knowledge. Despite the terror clawing at my throat, a morbid curiosity held me rooted to the spot. I had studied the occult for years, but theoretical knowledge felt woefully inadequate against the palpable evil radiating from this being. It was like comparing a textbook on swimming to being plunged into the crushing depths of the ocean. What are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely a whisper against the chorus swirling around me. The figure chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that seemed to scrape against the very foundations of the manor. "We are the keepers, the guardians, the voices within the walls. We have many names, Elias, but the most important name is the one you will soon learn." The figure gestured towards the ancient tome lying open on the desk. The book was bound in dark leather, its pages filled with arcane symbols and indecipherable script. It pulsed with a faint, inner light, as if alive. This is the Liber Tenebris," I breathed, recognizing the name from my studies. "The Book of Shadows, a grimoire of forbidden rituals said to contain the secrets of ultimate power," the figure finished, its voice dripping with a seductive promise. "Of transcendence, of immortality, all within your grasp, Elias, if you are willing to pay the price." My mind reeled. The Liber Tenebris was a legend, a myth whispered among occult scholars. To see it, to stand before it. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. But the figure's words, they were laced with a darkness that chilled me to the bone. "What price?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure smiled, a ghastly, predatory expression that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "The price of your soul, of course. But do not fret, Elias. It is a small price to pay for the power we offer, a fleeting moment of pain followed by an eternity of bliss. I recoiled, the seductive allure of the offer shattering against the stark reality of its cost. I can't, I won't. The figure's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. You have no choice, Elias. This house has chosen you. We have chosen you. Your bloodline is tied to this place, to this power. You are destined to serve us. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar that threatened to shatter my sanity. The room began to spin, the walls closing in around me. I felt a crushing pressure on my chest, as if the house itself was trying to suffocate me. I screamed, clutching my head in my hands. I'll fight you, I'll destroy this book, I'll. Before I could finish, the figure raised its hand, and a wave of energy slammed into me, throwing me backward against the bookshelves. Books tumbled down around me, burying me beneath a cascade of forbidden knowledge. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body racked with pain. The figure loomed over me, its eyes burning with an unholy light. You cannot fight us, Elias, it said, its voice a low, menacing growl. We are the house, we are the land, we are the very air you breathe. You are trapped here forever, and soon you will become one of us. The figure began to chant, its voice a guttural drone that resonated deep within my bones. The symbols on the pages of the Liber Tenebris glowed brighter, casting eerie shadows across the room. The air crackled with energy, and a strange, acrid smell filled my nostrils. I struggled to rise to escape, but I was paralyzed, unable to move. The figure's chanting grew louder, faster, more intense. I felt a searing pain in my head, as if my skull was being cracked open from the inside. Memories flooded my mind, fragments of my past, twisted and distorted by the figure's power. I saw my parents' car crash, the twisted metal, the shattered glass, the blood. I saw my grandfather, a cold, distant figure performing strange rituals in the dead of night. I saw myself, a lonely, isolated child drawn to the darkness, seeking answers in forbidden lore. The memories intensified, merging together, forming a horrifying tapestry of pain, loss, and despair. I felt my mind unraveling, my sanity slipping away. And then I saw it. A vision of the future. A future where I was no longer Elias Thorne, the historian, but something else. Something monstrous. A creature of darkness, bound to the house, serving the keepers, perpetuating their evil for eternity. The vision was so vivid, so real that I screamed. The scream echoed through the library, a desperate plea for help that would never be answered. Suddenly the chanting stopped. The figure paused, its eyes widening in surprise. "What?" it whispered, its voice filled with confusion. "It cannot be." I didn't understand what was happening, but I seized the opportunity. Summoning every ounce of strength I possessed, I forced myself to move. I crawled towards the desk, reaching for the Liber Tenebris. The figure lunged at me, but I was too quick. I grabbed the book and slammed it shut. The room went dark, the whispers ceased, the figure vanished. I lay there, panting, my body trembling, the Liber Tenebris clutched tightly in my hands. The silence was deafening, broken only by the pounding of my heart. Had I won? Had I stopped the ritual? Had I saved myself? I didn't know. But I knew one thing: the house wasn't finished with me yet. The keepers weren't finished with me. And the Liber Tenebris, it was more than just a book. It was a key. A key to unlocking the secrets of the manor, the secrets of my bloodline, the secrets of the darkness that lurked within me. And I knew with a chilling certainty that I would have to use that key. I had to understand what was happening, why I had been chosen, what the keepers wanted. But I also knew that doing so would lead me down a path even darker and more dangerous than the one I had already traveled. I opened the Liber Tenebris. The pages were blank. Completely, utterly blank. Except for one thing. A single word, written in a flowing, elegant script on the very first page. Remember. Remember what? Remember who? Remember what? The house was a puzzle, and I was quickly realizing it wasn't going to just hand me the answers on a silver platter. It was going to be a fight, a terrifying, mentally and physically draining battle against forces I didn't even understand. But I wasn't just fighting for my life, was I? I was fighting for my very soul, for the soul of my family, for the soul of the house. Was that even possible? Could a building have a soul? And what did it mean that the Liber Tenebris was blank? Was this a test? Some sort of trick? If so, it was brilliantly executed, as I had no idea what to do. I stared at the word remember until the letters blurred, the word losing all meaning. I tried to sift through my memories, searching for something, a clue, a hint, anything to get me started, but nothing came. Perhaps the answer wasn't in my memories, but in the memories of the house. After all, it had been watching me my whole life. And before that, it had watched my parents and my grandfather and all the Thornes who had come before me. Generations of secrets, of triumphs and tragedies, of lives lived and lost within these very walls. But how did one access the memories of a house? It wasn't like I could just sit down and have a conversation with the walls. Or could I? The whispers. They were a part of the house, weren't they? Could they be the key? I shuddered at the thought. Those whispers were terrifying, insidious, and I didn't trust them for a second. But what choice did I have? If I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to understand what was happening, I needed to listen to the voices within the walls. So, with a deep breath and a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, or perhaps, more accurately, to whatever demons might be listening, I closed my eyes and opened myself to the house. Remember, I whispered aloud, hoping to trigger something, anything. And then the whispers came. They weren't as loud or chaotic as before. This time they were softer, more focused, as if they were responding to my summons. Remember the garden, they whispered. Remember the roses. The garden. What did the garden have to do with anything? It was just a garden, overgrown and neglected like everything else on the property. But the whispers were insistent. Remember the garden. I opened my eyes, the word remember still echoing in my mind. The Liber Tenebris remained blank, a silent challenge. I had a starting point, at least, a place to begin my investigation, a place to confront the mysteries of the house. The garden. I walked towards the window, the first rays of dawn painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The garden lay below, a tangled mess of weeds and thorny bushes, but even from this distance I could see them. The roses. They were unlike anything I had ever seen. Black as night, their petals velvety and smooth, exuding a faint, intoxicating fragrance. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, a dark, alluring beauty that both fascinated and repelled me. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the answers I sought were hidden within those black roses, and I knew that the path to those answers would be paved with terror and despair. But I had no choice. I had to remember, and I had to face the garden, because the alternative was becoming one with the walls, a puppet dancing to the tune of the keepers, a prisoner of my own haunted inheritance. I steeled my resolve, took a deep breath, and headed towards the door. The house watched me, its silence heavy with anticipation, and I knew as I descended the stairs that the game had truly begun. Chapter 3: Thorns and Shadows. The air outside was thick with the scent of salt and damp earth, a familiar aroma that usually brought a sense of calm. This morning, however, it felt oppressive, heavy with foreboding. The manor loomed behind me, a silent sentinel watching my every move. The gargoyles, normally just grotesque stone figures, seemed to leer with knowing amusement. The garden was a tangled mess, even worse than I had imagined. Weeds choked the flower beds, thorny bushes clawed at my clothes, and the air was thick with insects. It was clear that no one had tended to this place in decades. It was a testament to decay, a reflection of the manor's slow descent into ruin. As I made my way through the overgrown foliage, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The garden felt alive, sentient, as if the plants themselves were observing me, judging me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. The black roses were clustered in the center of the garden, surrounded by a dense thicket of thorny bushes. They were even more striking up close, their velvety petals absorbing the sunlight, casting a dark, almost unnatural shadow. The fragrance they exuded was intoxicating, sweet and alluring, but with an underlying hint of decay, a subtle reminder of mortality. I hesitated before approaching them, a sense of unease settling over me. These weren't ordinary roses, they were something other, something tainted, something wrong. As I reached out to touch one of the petals, a whisper echoed through the garden. "Touch not the thorns, Elias." I recoiled, my hand trembling. The whisper seemed to come from the roses themselves, a collective murmur of warning. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. A silence. I scanned the garden, but I was alone. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. Had I imagined it? Was the house playing tricks on me again? I took a deep breath and reached for the rose again, ignoring the warning. I needed to understand these flowers, to unravel their mystery. As my fingers brushed against the velvety petals, a sharp pain shot through my hand. I recoiled, clutching my hand to my chest. Blood welled up from a small puncture wound on my fingertip. I examined the wound, but there was no sign of a thorn. The rose's petals were smooth, soft. Then I saw it. A shadow moved in the corner of my eye, a fleeting glimpse of something dark and indistinct. I whirled around, scanning the garden, but there was nothing there. This is getting ridiculous, I muttered to myself, trying to maintain a semblance of sanity. I'm imagining things. I need to calm down. I took a deep breath and focused on the roses, trying to ignore the whispers, the shadows, the creeping sense of dread. I examined the flower more closely, noticing intricate patterns on its petals, patterns that seemed to shift and change as I watched. They resembled symbols, arcane sigils that I recognized from my studies. They were symbols of necromancy, of death and resurrection. A chill ran down my spine. These roses weren't just flowers, they were conduits, gateways to something dark. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The roses began to sway, their petals rustling like whispered secrets. The air grew cold, and a dense fog rolled in, obscuring the manor and the surrounding landscape. The garden was now a small, isolated island of darkness, surrounded by a sea of swirling mist. A figure emerged from the fog, its form indistinct and shifting. It was tall and gaunt, shrouded in darkness, just like the figure in the library. "You should have heeded our warning, Elias," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "The roses are not for you." I knew instinctively that this was one of the keepers, one of the entities that controlled the house, that sought to claim my soul. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to project an air of confidence that I didn't feel. "We want what is rightfully ours," the keeper replied. "The power that lies dormant within you. The power that is tied to this land, to this house, to these roses." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, lying through my teeth. "You do," the keeper insisted. "You feel it, don't you? The darkness within you calling out to us. Embrace it, Elias. Embrace your destiny." "I'll never join you," I said, my voice trembling but firm. The keeper chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You have no choice, Elias. Your will is weak. Your mind is fragile. We will break you and you will serve us." The keeper raised its hand, and the roses began to glow with an eerie green light. The thorns on the bushes grew longer, sharper, more menacing. The fog began to swirl faster, and the whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar. I felt a crushing pressure on my chest, as if the house itself was trying to suffocate me. I knew that I was in grave danger, that I was on the verge of losing control. I had to do something, anything, to resist the keeper's power. Thinking quickly, I remembered something I had read in one of the old journals in the library. A ritual, a protection spell, designed to ward off evil spirits. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. Closing my eyes, I began to chant the words of the spell, my voice trembling but determined. "Ex spiritus malignis, ex tenebris infernis, ex omnibus malis libera me." The keeper recoiled, its eyes widening in surprise. The roses flickered, their green light dimming. I continued to chant, my voice growing stronger, more confident. "A pest fame et bello, a fulgur et tempestate, a mort perpetua libera me." The fog began to dissipate, and the roses lost their glow. The keeper's form flickered, becoming less distinct. Sanct Michael Archangel defend nos in prelio, contra nequitium et insidias diaboli esto presidium. Imperit illi Deus, supplices deprecamur, tuc, princeps militiae caelestis, Satanam aliasque spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum pervagantur in mundo, divina virtute in infernum detrude. Amen. As I finished the spell, the keeper let out a blood-curdling scream and vanished into the fog. The roses returned to their normal black hue, and the fog began to dissipate, revealing the manor in the distance. I stood there, panting, my body trembling, the sweat dripping down my face. I had survived, but I knew that it was only a temporary reprieve. The keepers would be back, and they would be even more determined to claim me. But I had also learned something valuable. I had learned that they were not invincible, that they could be resisted. And I had learned that the answers I sought were somehow connected to the black roses. I looked down at my hand, at the small puncture wound on my fingertip. It was still bleeding, and the blood was black as ink. A new sense of dread washed over me. The roses hadn't just wounded me, they had infected me. I felt a strange, unsettling sensation spreading through my veins, a dark, alien presence taking root within me. The game was far from over. It was just beginning, and the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. The darkness wasn't just outside the house, it was inside me now. I turned and looked back at Thorne Manor. The gargoyles seemed to be smiling. The house had played its trick. Chapter 4: The Black Vein. The black blood continued to ooze from the tiny wound, defying any attempt to staunch it. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping dread that threatened to overwhelm me. This wasn't just a scratch, it was an invasion. The roses, or whatever power they represented, had breached my defenses, and I could feel its influence spreading through my body. I stumbled back towards the manor, my legs feeling heavy and unresponsive. The familiar stone walls seemed to mock me, their silent presence amplifying my growing fear. The gargoyles' grins widened, or perhaps it was just my imagination playing tricks. Once inside, I rushed to the library, desperate for answers. The room felt different now, charged with a palpable energy. The books on the shelves seemed to hum with a low, almost inaudible frequency. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic like blood. I frantically searched through the journals, the grimoires, any text that might shed light on the black roses and their connection to the keepers. Hours passed, but I found nothing. The Liber Tenebris remained blank, a frustrating enigma. As the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the library, I noticed a strange sensation in my arm, a throbbing, pulsing pain that radiated from the wound on my fingertip. I rolled up my sleeve and gasped. A black vein was spreading up my arm, a dark, serpentine line crawling beneath my skin. It was pulsating with an unnatural light, casting eerie shadows on my flesh. The infection was spreading. Fear gave way to a grim determination. I couldn't afford to panic. I had to act. I needed to find a way to stop the infection, to sever the connection between myself and the roses, between myself and the keepers. I remembered another passage from one of the journals, a ritual for cleansing the body of dark influences. It was a dangerous ritual, involving fire and incantations, but it was my only hope. I gathered the necessary ingredients: a silver knife, a bowl of salt water, a handful of dried herbs, and a candle made from beeswax. I set up a small altar in the center of the library, drawing a circle around it with salt. The house seemed to hold its breath, the silence amplifying my every movement. The shadows danced in the corners of the room, as if waiting for me to fail. Stripping to the waist, I stared at my reflection in the silver knife. My face was pale, gaunt, my eyes wide with fear and desperation. The black vein was spreading rapidly, reaching my shoulder, its dark tendrils creeping towards my heart. Taking a deep breath, I lit the candle and began to chant the incantation, my voice trembling but determined. Ignis purificans flamma divina ex corpore meo expel tenebras. Aqua salis fons vidi lavami ab omni malo. Herbi sacri dona naturi sana mea pest. As I chanted, I plunged the silver knife into the flame of the candle, heating it until it glowed red hot. The pain was excruciating, but I gritted my teeth and continued the incantation. With a cry of determination, I pressed the burning knife against the black vein on my arm. The pain was unbearable, searing through my flesh, threatening to consume me. I screamed, the sound echoing through the library. Smoke billowed from the wound, filling the air with a pungent odor. The black vein began to shrink, its pulsating light dimming. I continued to chant, pressing the burning knife against my arm, enduring the pain until I could bear it no longer. Finally, with a shuddering gasp, the black vein vanished. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted and in agony. My arm was a charred mess, covered in burns and blood, but the infection was gone. The connection was severed. Or so I thought. As I lay there, gasping for breath, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "You cannot escape us, Elias. The connection is deeper than you know." I scrambled to my feet, scanning the library, but I was alone. The whispers were getting stronger, more insistent, more personal. They were inside my head now, weaving themselves into my thoughts, influencing my actions. I realized with a chilling certainty that the ritual hadn't worked. It had only slowed the infection, not stopped it. The darkness was still within me, growing stronger, waiting for its opportunity to take control. Despair washed over me. Was there no escape? Was I doomed to become a puppet of the keepers, a creature of darkness, trapped within the walls of Thorne Manor for eternity? As I sank to the floor, defeated, my gaze fell upon the Liber Tenebris. It was still blank, but something had changed. A faint image was beginning to appear on the first page, a shadowy outline of a garden bathed in moonlight. And in the center of the garden, a single black rose, pulsating with an eerie green light. The image grew clearer, more vivid, until it filled the entire page. I felt myself being drawn into the image, pulled towards the garden, towards the roses, towards the keepers. Resisting with all my might, I slammed the book shut. The image vanished, but the connection remained. I could feel the pull of the roses, the seductive lure of the keepers, growing stronger with each passing moment. I knew that I couldn't stay in the manor. It was too dangerous. The house was alive, sentient, and it was working against me. I had to escape to find a place where I could be safe, where I could fight the darkness that was consuming me. But where could I go? Where could I find refuge from the power of Thorne Manor? Then I remembered something my grandfather had once told me, a story about a hidden sanctuary, a place of ancient power, where the forces of light and darkness were in balance. It was a myth, a legend, but it was my only hope. It was called the Isle of Avalon. According to the legend, it lay hidden somewhere in the Atlantic, shrouded in mist and magic, accessible only to those who possessed the knowledge and the will to find it. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but I had no other choice. I had to find the Isle of Avalon. And I had to do it before the darkness consumed me completely. Or I would become what the house wanted me to be and forever be trapped here. With a renewed sense of determination, I packed a bag with essential supplies: food, water, a map, a compass, and the Liber Tenebris. I hesitated before taking the book, knowing its power, its danger. But I couldn't leave it behind. It was the key to understanding the house, to understanding the keepers, to understanding myself. I glanced back at the library, at the shadows that danced in the corners of the room. The house watched me, its silence heavy with anticipation. I knew that the keepers wouldn't let me leave without a fight, but I was ready. I was prepared to face whatever horrors they might unleash. I had a destination, I had a purpose, and I had a sliver of hope flickering in the darkness. I turned and walked towards the door, determined to escape the clutches of Thorne Manor and find my way to the Isle of Avalon. My path was not going to be easy, but one thing was for sure. I was done being a puppet in this theater of madness. Chapter 5: Escape from Thorne Manor. The escape from Thorne Manor was a harrowing ordeal. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent my heart racing. The shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, taking on grotesque shapes that mirrored the terrors within my own mind. The whispers, now a constant presence, urged me to stay, promising power, promising oblivion. I moved through the manor with a practiced stealth, born of years spent exploring its hidden passages and forgotten corners. It was a skill I never thought I'd use for escaping, but here I was. I avoided the main hallways, sticking to the back corridors and servant stairs, feeling like a thief in my own home. The house seemed to sense my intentions, its atmosphere growing increasingly hostile. The temperature plummeted, and a biting wind howled through the cracks in the windows, rattling the panes and creating an eerie symphony of moans and groans. As I reached the back entrance, a heavy oak door that opened onto a neglected courtyard, I heard a distinct sound coming from the library, the sound of pages turning. My blood ran cold. The Liber Tenebris, had it opened on its own? Were the keepers trying to lure me back? I hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the need to investigate. Curiosity, the historian's curse, gnawed at me. What if the book held a clue to my escape, a way to defeat the keepers once and for all? Against my better judgment, I crept back towards the library. my hand gripping the silver knife hidden in my pocket. The door was ajar, just as I had left it. Peeking inside, I saw nothing but shadows. The room was silent, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the stained glass windows. I cautiously stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of dust and incense, an unsettling combination that spoke of forgotten rituals. The Liber Tenebris lay open on the desk, its pages glowing with a faint, ethereal light. The shadowy image of the garden was still there, but it had changed. The black roses were now surrounded by thorns that twisted and writhed like serpents, their points dripping with venom. As I watched, a figure emerged from the image, stepping out of the book and into the library. It was one of the keepers, its form indistinct and shifting, its eyes burning with an unholy light. "You cannot escape your destiny, Elias," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "You belong to us." I lunged forward, brandishing the silver knife. The keeper recoiled, its form flickering. "You cannot harm us with mortal weapons," it hissed. "We are beyond your understanding." "I'm not trying to harm you," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "I'm trying to sever the connection. I'm trying to free myself." I plunged the silver knife into the open pages of the Liber Tenebris, slashing through the shadowy image of the garden. The room erupted in a blinding flash of light. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The keeper screamed, its form dissolving into a cloud of black smoke. When the light subsided, the library was silent. The Liber Tenebris lay closed on the desk, its pages blank once more. Had I destroyed the connection? Had I defeated the keeper? I didn't know, but I couldn't take any chances. I had to leave now before they came back. I turned and fled the library, running through the manor with reckless abandon. I burst through the back entrance and into the courtyard, ignoring the pain in my arm, the fear in my heart. The courtyard was shrouded in mist, the air thick with the scent of decay. The neglected flower beds were overgrown with weeds, and the stone statues were covered in moss and lichen. It was a scene of utter desolation. As I made my way towards the gate, I heard a rustling sound coming from the bushes. I froze, my hand gripping the silver knife. A pair of glowing red eyes emerged from the darkness, followed by a low growl. A monstrous dog, its fur as black as night, its teeth bared in a savage grin, lunged at me. I screamed and stumbled backward, barely managing to avoid its snapping jaws. The dog was unlike anything I had ever seen, its eyes burning with an unholy light, its body radiating an aura of pure evil. It was a hellhound, a creature of darkness summoned by the keepers to prevent my escape. I knew that I couldn't fight it. I was no match for its strength and ferocity. I had to run. I turned and fled, the hellhound hot on my heels. I ran through the courtyard, dodging the overgrown flower beds and crumbling statues, my breath catching in my throat. The dog was gaining on me, its savage growls echoing through the mist. I could feel its hot breath on my neck, its sharp claws tearing at my clothes. Just as it was about to pounce, I reached the gate. I fumbled with the latch, my fingers trembling with fear. Finally, the gate swung open, and I burst through, sprinting towards the woods that surrounded the manor. The hellhound followed me, its relentless pursuit driving me onward. I ran through the trees, dodging branches and leaping over fallen logs, my lungs burning, my legs aching. The woods were dark and foreboding, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I could hear the hellhound gaining on me, its heavy paws pounding on the ground, its savage growls echoing through the trees. Just as I thought I was about to be caught, I stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient oak tree, its trunk as wide as a house, its branches reaching towards the sky like supplicating arms. I ran towards the tree, desperate for shelter. As I reached its base, I noticed something strange carved into its trunk, a circle of runes glowing with a faint, ethereal light. I recognized the runes from my studies. They were symbols of protection, of banishment, of power. They were a ward against evil. I stepped inside the circle, hoping that it would protect me from the hellhound. The dog reached the clearing and stopped at the edge of the circle, its eyes burning with frustration. It snarled and snapped, but it couldn't cross the boundary. The runes were working. I stood there panting, my body trembling, the hellhound snarling and snapping just beyond my reach. I was safe for now. But I knew that the keepers wouldn't give up. They would find another way to stop me, another way to claim my soul. I had to keep moving. I had to find the Isle of Avalon. But first, I needed to rest, to gather my strength, to prepare for the journey ahead. I leaned against the ancient oak tree, closing my eyes, listening to the wind rustling through its branches. The runes glowed warmly against my skin, providing a sense of comfort and security. For the first time since arriving at Thorne Manor, I felt a sliver of hope. I had escaped the clutches of the house, at least for now. I had survived the hellhound. I had found a place of sanctuary. Perhaps, just perhaps, I had a chance. But I knew, deep down, that the darkness was still within me, waiting to emerge. And I knew that the journey to the Isle of Avalon would be fraught with peril, a descent into the very heart of horror. Chapter 6: Whispers in the Woods. Rest was a luxury I couldn't afford, not really. The respite offered by the ancient oak and its protective runes was temporary. The hellhound, though thwarted, still prowled the edges of the clearing, its growls a constant reminder of the danger. More importantly, the whispers hadn't ceased. They had merely shifted in tone, from threats to insidious temptations, promising a swift end to my suffering if I would only surrender. My exhaustion was profound. The ritual, the fight with the keeper, the flight from the manor, all had taken their toll. My muscles ached, my head throbbed, and the black blood still stained my shirt. But I forced myself to focus, to remain vigilant. I knew that the moment I let down my guard was the moment I would be lost. I ate a few of the meager provisions I'd packed, a stale piece of bread and a hard, tasteless cheese. I drank sparingly from my water skin, conserving the precious resource. The Liber Tenebris lay at my side, its blank pages mocking me. I considered consulting it again, hopping for some guidance, but I feared opening myself to the keeper's influence. The last encounter had been terrifying, and I didn't know if I could withstand another assault on my sanity. I had to rely on my own knowledge, my own instincts. My grandfather's map, which I had managed to grab before fleeing the manor, showed the general location of the Isle of Avalon, somewhere in the North Atlantic, beyond the reach of any known shipping lanes. The map was old and faded, its details vague, its directions cryptic. The coastline was depicted in a style that was centuries out of date. Navigating by its guidance was a daunting prospect. I had to get to the coast. From there, I'd figure out the means of transport, perhaps a small fishing boat, anything to get me on the open water. The map didn't specify a particular route, but I knew the general direction I needed to travel, east towards the coast. The woods, however, were treacherous. The path was overgrown and obscured, and the shadows played tricks on my eyes. The trees seemed to twist and turn, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The whispers intensified as I moved deeper into the woods, becoming a chorus of conflicting voices, urging me to go in opposite directions. Some whispered promises of power, of a quick and easy route, of a blissful end to my suffering. Others warned of danger, of traps, of the keeper's influence. I tried to block them out to focus on the path ahead, but it was difficult, almost impossible. They were inside my head, a constant barrage of noise, influencing my thoughts, my actions. I realized that I had to find a way to silence the whispers, or they would drive me mad. I remembered a passage from one of the old journals, a technique for mental discipline, for focusing the mind and warding off unwanted thoughts. It involved visualizing a protective barrier, a shield against the influence of darkness. Closing my eyes, I began to concentrate, visualizing a circle of light surrounding me, a barrier against the encroaching darkness. I focused on the feeling of safety, of peace, of unwavering resolve. Slowly, the whispers began to fade. The conflicting voices grew quieter, their influence diminishing. The circle of light grew brighter, pushing back the shadows, creating a sense of calm. I opened my eyes, feeling a renewed sense of focus. The woods still felt eerie, but the panic had subsided. I could think clearly, make decisions, and trust my instincts. I continued my journey through the woods, cautiously navigating the treacherous terrain, keeping a watchful eye out for the hellhound and any other dangers that might lurk ahead. I had been walking for hours when I came across a small, overgrown path. It looked rarely used, but I felt drawn to it, a sense of familiarity, of recognition. The whispers, momentarily subdued, returned, urging me to avoid the path, warning of hidden dangers. But I ignored them, trusting my instincts. I followed the path, and it led me to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a small, dilapidated cottage. The cottage was small, built of rough-hewn logs, its roof sagging, its windows boarded up. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, suggesting that someone was living there. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. They were now a cacophony of voices, screaming at me to flee. I hesitated. Should I approach the cottage? Was it a trap? A dwelling of the keepers? Or could it be a source of help, a refuge from the woods? I decided to approach cautiously. I crept towards the cottage, staying in the shadows, keeping a watchful eye out for any signs of danger. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. A figure was standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from within. It was an old woman, her form hunched and frail, her face obscured by shadow. She was holding a gnarled walking stick, and she was staring directly at me. The whispers fell silent. I stopped, frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Should I speak? The old woman spoke first, her voice raspy and weak. "Come closer, child," she said. "You look weary and lost." I hesitated, but my curiosity, my desperate need for help, overcame my fear. I took a step forward, then another. As I approached the cottage, the old woman's face came into view. Her features were weathered and lined, her eyes deep-set and dark. She had a long, crooked nose and a wispy of white hair escaping from under her shawl. She wasn't beautiful, but there was something familiar about her, a sense of warmth and wisdom. "Are you a friend?" I asked, my voice trembling. The old woman smiled, a fleeting, enigmatic expression. "Perhaps, perhaps not. That depends on you, child. Come in, come in. You are cold and hungry." Against my better judgment, I stepped into the cottage. The interior was dimly lit, illuminated by a flickering fire in the hearth. The room was small and cluttered, filled with old furniture, dusty books, and jars of dried herbs and roots. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and something else, something earthy, like old soil. The old woman gestured towards a rickety wooden chair beside the fire. "Sit, rest. You look like you've seen a ghost." I sat down, gratefully accepting the warmth of the fire. My body ached, and my mind was still reeling from my recent experiences. The old woman studied me, her dark eyes piercing, as if she could see right through me. "You are troubled, child," she said, "and you carry a heavy burden." I don't know what to do," I confessed, my voice cracking with emotion. "I'm being hunted by something evil." The old woman nodded as if she already knew. "Thorne Manor, a place of shadows and secrets, a place where the veil between worlds is thin." "You know about Thorne Manor?" I asked, my voice filled with surprise. "I know many things, child," she said with a knowing smile. "I have lived in these woods for many years. I have seen many things, and I know your family's history. The Thornes have always been drawn to darkness." "But why?" I asked. "Why are they after me?" The old woman looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness. "Because you are the inheritor, the chosen one, the one who holds the key." "The key to what?" "To the power that lies within Thorne Manor, to the power that the keepers crave." "The keepers?" "The entities that dwell within the walls, the voices that whisper in your mind, the forces that seek to corrupt you, to claim your soul." "How do I stop them?" I asked, my voice filled with desperation. "How do I escape?" The old woman leaned forward, her eyes locking with mine. "You must go to the Isle of Avalon, child. It is your only hope." "Avalon, but how do I get there? I have a map, but it's old and the directions are vague." "The map is enough," the old woman said. Trust your instincts, follow the signs, but be warned the journey will be perilous. The keepers will do everything in their power to stop you. What must I do? First, she said, you must cleanse yourself. The darkness has tainted you and it will hinder your progress. You must purify your body and your mind. She reached for a small pouch hanging from her waist and opened it, revealing a collection of herbs and powders. Take these, she said, handing me a handful of the herbs. Use them to create a purifying bath. Then you must meditate and clear your mind of all negative thoughts. Concentrate on the light, on the hope, on the strength that lies within you. I took the herbs, my hand trembling. I didn't know if I could trust her, but I had no other choice. I had to believe, to hope, that she was telling the truth. And what about the roses, the black roses? They are a sign, the woman said, her voice grave. A test, a temptation. They are a gateway, and you must resist them. How? By remembering, she said. Remember your family's history. Remember your own strength. Remember who you are, and remember why you fight. The old woman stood up, her frail form casting a long shadow across the cottage. Now, she said, you must rest. You will need your strength for the journey ahead. I will prepare a place for you to sleep. Tomorrow you will leave. She turned and walked towards a back room, leaving me alone by the fire. As I sat there, the whispers still echoing faintly in my mind, I couldn't help but wonder, was she truly a friend? Or was she another pawn in the keeper's game? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led into another trap. Yet at the same time, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of hope that I hadn't felt since the day I arrived at Thorne Manor. I had to trust, even if it meant risking everything. The fate of my soul, it seemed, hung in the balance. The house, the keepers, my family. The Isle of Avalon. It was all one big, terrifying riddle, and I was the only one who could solve it. Chapter 7. The Cleansing Ritual. The night in the old woman's cottage was restless. Sleep offered little escape from the whispers, which continued their insidious campaign, preying on my fears and insecurities. Even in my dreams, the black roses bloomed, their thorns reaching out to ensnare me. I woke several times, soaked in a cold sweat, convinced that the keepers were just outside the door, waiting to drag me back to Thorne Manor. The old woman, who introduced herself as Elara, seemed to sense my unease. She offered me a warm herbal tea, brewed from plants she'd gathered in the woods, claiming it would soothe my spirit. The tea did have a calming effect, though I couldn't shake the lingering suspicion that it might also be clouding my judgment. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of gray and pink, Elara led me to a small, secluded spring nestled deep within the woods. The water was crystal clear, shimmering with an otherworldly light. The air around the spring was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, creating a soothing melody. "This is where you will cleanse yourself," Elara said, her voice soft but firm. "The water is pure, imbued with the power of the earth. It will wash away the darkness that clings to you." I hesitated, feeling self-conscious and vulnerable. Stripping naked in the cold morning air was not my idea of a spiritual awakening. But I knew that Elara was right. I needed to purify myself, to sever the remaining ties to Thorne Manor. "What do I do?" I asked, shivering despite the layers of clothing I was wearing. "First, you must heat the water," Alara said, pointing to a pile of stones and a small fire pit. "Then, add the herbs I gave you and let them steep. While the water heats, you must prepare yourself mentally. Reflect on your past, on your mistakes, on your fears. Confront them, acknowledge them, and then release them." I gathered the stones and started a fire, feeling a strange sense of purpose. As the flames flickered and danced, I began to reflect on my life, on the events that had led me to this moment. I thought about my parents, their sudden and tragic death, the void they had left in my life. I thought about my grandfather, a cold and distant figure, his obsession with the occult, the secrets he had kept hidden within the walls of Thorne Manor. And I thought about myself, my own fascination with the darkness, my desperate search for answers in forbidden lore. I saw my mistakes, my flaws, my weaknesses, my tendency to isolate myself, my inability to form meaningful connections, my desperate need for validation. I acknowledged my fears, my anxieties, my insecurities, my fear of failure, my fear of loneliness, my fear of the darkness that lurked within my own soul. As the water began to heat, I felt a shift within me, a sense of acceptance, of forgiveness, of letting go. The weight of my past began to lift, and I felt a renewed sense of hope. When the water was hot enough, I added the herbs, their fragrance filling the air. The water turned a deep emerald green, shimmering with an otherworldly light. "Now," Alara said, her voice soft but commanding, "you must enter the water. Immerse yourself completely and let it wash away the darkness." I hesitated, feeling a sudden surge of fear. What if the water wasn't as pure as Alara claimed? What if it was tainted with the Keeper's influence? But I pushed aside my doubts and stepped into the spring. The water was shockingly cold, stealing my breath and sending shivers down my spine. I gasped and plunged beneath the surface, immersing myself completely in the emerald green liquid. As the water enveloped me, I felt a tingling sensation spreading through my body. The herbs began to work their magic, cleansing my skin, purifying my blood, soothing my soul. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, letting go of all thoughts, all anxieties, all fears. I was simply present, one with the water, one with the earth, one with the universe. The whispers faded, their influence diminishing. The darkness receded, replaced by a sense of peace and serenity. I remained submerged for several minutes until my lungs began to burn. I surfaced, gasping for air, feeling refreshed and renewed. I stepped out of the spring, shivering in the cold air. Alara handed me a rough-spun towel, which I gratefully accepted. As I dried myself, I looked back at the water. It was now crystal clear, shimmering with a brilliant white light. The emerald green color had vanished, replaced by purity and clarity. I felt transformed, cleansed, purified. The darkness was still within me, but it was diminished, weakened. I was stronger now, more resilient, more determined. "The cleansing is complete," Alara said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "You are ready for the next step." "What is the next step?" I asked. "You must find your way to the coast," Alara said. "And there you must find a way to cross the sea." The sea, I asked, my heart sinking. But I don't know how to sail, and I don't have any money to hire a boat. Do not worry, Elara said. The sea will provide. Trust in the universe and it will guide you. I looked at her skeptically, but I didn't argue. I knew that I had to trust her, to trust in the universe, to trust in myself. What about the keepers? I asked. Won't they try to stop me? They will, Elara said. But you are stronger now. You are cleansed, purified, and protected. And you have something that they cannot take away from you, your will to resist. Elara reached into her pouch and pulled out a small, smooth stone. It was black as night, but it shimmered with an inner light. Take this, she said, handing me the stone. It is a ward against evil. Hold it close and it will protect you from harm. I took the stone, feeling its warmth in my hand. It was a tangible reminder of Elara's help, a symbol of hope in the face of darkness. Thank you, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. I don't know how to repay you. You need not repay me, Elara said. Simply remember what you have learned here and use your power for good. The world needs more light, more hope, more compassion. She smiled, a warm and genuine expression that banished all my doubts. Now, she said, you must go. The journey awaits, and the keepers are growing impatient. I nodded, steeled my resolve, and turned to leave. One more thing, Elara said, stopping me in my tracks. The Liber Tenebris. You must learn to control its power. It is a dangerous weapon, but it can also be a powerful tool. Use it wisely, and it may lead you to salvation. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a knowing sadness. But be warned, she said. The book has a will of its own, and it will test you, tempt you, and try to corrupt you. Do not let it consume you. Remember who you are and remember why you fight. I nodded, understanding her warning. The Liber Tenebris was more than just a book. It was a reflection of my own soul, and it was up to me to choose whether to embrace the darkness or to fight for the light. I turned and walked away, leaving Elara and the sanctuary of the spring behind. The woods still felt eerie, but I was no longer afraid. I was cleansed, purified, and protected, and I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey to the coast was long and arduous, fraught with peril, but I was determined to reach my destination. I had a purpose, a mission, and a sliver of hope. And I knew deep down that I was not alone. The spirit of my parents, the wisdom of Elara, the power of the runes, and the strength of my own will would guide me on my path. The Isle of Avalon awaited, and I was determined to find it, even though I knew the whispers were slowly beginning to make me doubt and fear the journey. But for now, I would focus on the task at hand and move forward into the unknown. Chapter 8: The Coastal Town of Shadows. The trek from Elara's cottage to the coast was a descent, both literally and figuratively, into a landscape increasingly tinged with unease. The protective circle I visualized began to feel thinner, its light flickering against the encroaching darkness. The smooth black stone Elara had given me grew noticeably colder, a stark contrast to the warmth I'd initially felt. The whispers returned, not as loud as before, but more persistent, like flies buzzing around a wound. They sowed seeds of doubt, about Elara's true motives, about the existence of Avalon, about my own ability to withstand the darkness. The woods gradually thinned, giving way to rolling hills dotted with windswept fields. The weather turned colder, the sky overcast, the wind carrying the sharp tang of salt. Civilization, or what passed for it in this remote corner of the world, began to reappear. Dilapidated farmhouses, overgrown stone walls, and crumbling barns that seemed to sag under the weight of their own history. But there were no people. An unnatural silence pervaded the landscape, broken only by the mournful cry of seagulls and the distant roar of the ocean. The map guided me, though its ancient symbols were often difficult to decipher. Several times I found myself backtracking, having followed paths that led to nowhere. Frustration mounted, and the whispers seized the opportunity, suggesting that I abandon the quest, that Avalon was nothing but a fairy tale, that I was destined to fail. I fought back, reminding myself of Ilara's words, of my own strength, of the need to resist the darkness. I clung to the memory of the cleansing ritual, of the feeling of peace and purity I had experienced in the spring. Finally, after days of arduous travel, I reached the crest of a hill, and before me lay the ocean. A vast expanse of gray, churning water stretching to the horizon. The sight, normally awe-inspiring, filled me with a sense of dread. The sea seemed angry, turbulent, as if warning me to stay away. Nestled along the coast at the mouth of a narrow inlet was a town, a cluster of weathered buildings huddled together, clinging to the rocky shore, as if afraid of being swept away by the tide. It was a depressing sight, a portrait of decay and desolation. The map indicated that this was Port Sorrow, the last town before Avalon. The name itself sent a shiver down my spine. As I descended the hill, I noticed something odd about the town. There were no signs of life, no smoke rising from the chimneys, no boats bobbing in the harbor, no people walking the streets. It was as if the town had been abandoned, frozen in time. Approaching the town, I felt a growing sense of unease. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and something else, something rotten like decaying seaweed. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the creaking of the buildings and the mournful cry of the wind. Entering Port Sorrow was like stepping into a ghost town. The streets were deserted, littered with debris, broken glass, rotting wood, and scraps of torn fabric. The buildings were dilapidated, their paint peeling, their windows boarded up. Some had collapsed entirely, their roofs caved in, their walls reduced to rubble. A thick fog clung to the streets, obscuring details and creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. The shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, taking on grotesque shapes that mirrored the terrors within my own mind. The whispers intensified, urging me to turn back, warning of unspeakable horrors that lurked within the town. I pressed on, determined to find anyone who could help me reach Avalon. I explored the town, searching every building, every alleyway, every nook and cranny. But it was all the same, empty, desolate, lifeless. In the center of town, I found a church. Its steeple was broken, its stained glass windows shattered. The doors were ajar, inviting me inside. Hesitantly, I stepped into the church. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of incense and decay. The pews were overturned, the altar desecrated, the walls covered in graffiti. A figure was kneeling before the altar, its back to me. It was dressed in a long black robe, its head bowed in prayer. Relief flooded me. Finally, someone. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing through the church. "Can you help me?" The figure didn't respond. I approached cautiously, feeling a growing sense of unease. "Excuse me," I said, my voice louder this time. "I'm looking for a way to get to the Isle of Avalon. Do you know how to get there?" The figure slowly raised its head and turned to face me. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with terror. Her lips were sewn shut with thick black thread. She opened her mouth, and a blood-curdling scream erupted from her throat, a silent, agonizing cry that seemed to tear at my soul. I recoiled in horror, stumbling backward. The woman lunged at me, her arms outstretched, her eyes burning with madness. I screamed and fled the church, running through the streets of Port Sorrow with reckless abandon. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The shadows seemed to lengthen and twist, taking on grotesque shapes that mirrored the terrors within my own mind. I realized with a chilling certainty that Port Sorrow was not just a ghost town, it was a trap, a prison for lost souls, a haven for the keepers. And I had walked right into it. The hairs on my body began to stand on end as the temperature started to plummet. I clutched the black stone in my hand and began running toward the docks as fast as I could. Chapter 9: The Derelict Docks and the Silent Fishermen. My flight from the church was a desperate scramble through the decaying heart of Port Sorrow. Each step was accompanied by the imagined echo of the woman's silent scream, a sound that vibrated within my very bones. The fog thickened, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The whispers, now a chorus of mocking laughter and dire warnings, seemed to emanate from the very air. I gripped the black stone tighter, its cold surface a small comfort against the encroaching terror. The docks, when I finally reached them, were in a state of advanced decay. Pilings were rotten and splintered, some having collapsed entirely, plunging sections of the wooden platform into the icy water below. Ropes lay tangled and frayed, like the discarded entrails of some monstrous sea creature. The air reeked of brine, rotting fish, and something indefinably sinister. Several boats were moored to the docks, but all were in a state of disrepair. Their hulls were encrusted with barnacles, their sails torn and shredded, their decks covered in a thick layer of grime. They were ghost ships, silent witnesses to the town's long, slow decline. As I cautiously made my way along the precarious docks, I noticed a figure sitting on the edge of one of the boats. An old man hunched over, his back to me. He was dressed in tattered oilskins, his head covered by a battered sou'wester. He looked like a fisherman, though his stillness suggested something else entirely. Hope flickered within me. Perhaps this man was not a phantom, not another inhabitant of this haunted town. Perhaps he could help me find a way to Avalon. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Excuse me, sir." The figure didn't respond. I approached cautiously, my hand still gripping the black stone. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The man exuded an aura of profound sadness, a sense of utter despair that was almost palpable. "Sir," I said again, my voice a little louder this time, "I'm looking for a way to get to the Isle of Avalon. Do you know how to get there?" The figure slowly raised his head, and a gust of wind blew back his sou'wester, revealing his face. My breath caught in my throat. His face was a mask of grief. His eyes were hollow and empty, filled with a bottomless sorrow. His skin was pale and weathered, etched with deep lines that spoke of years of hardship and pain. But it wasn't his appearance that terrified me. It was the fact that he had no tongue. His mouth was a gaping hole, a silent scream frozen in time. I recoiled in horror, stumbling backward. The image of the woman in the church flashed through my mind, her lips sewn shut, her silent scream echoing in my soul. Was this another trap, another phantom, another victim of Port Sorrow? The fisherman slowly stood up, his movements stiff and jerky, as if his joints were rusted. He turned to face me, his empty eyes locking with mine. He raised a hand, and in it, he held a small, wooden carving of a boat. It was crudely made, but it was instantly recognizable. It was a replica of the boat he was sitting on. He extended his hand towards me, offering the carving. I hesitated. What did he want? What was he trying to tell me? The whispers intensified, urging me to flee, warning me of the fisherman's true nature. But I ignored them, drawn by a strange sense of empathy, a feeling that this man, despite his horrifying appearance, was trying to help me. I reached out and took the carving from his hand. As my fingers brushed against his, I felt a jolt of energy, a sudden rush of images flooding my mind. I saw his life, his youth spent fishing the waters off Port Sorrow, his love for the sea, his wife, his children. I saw the town thriving, bustling with activity, its docks filled with boats, its streets filled with laughter. I saw the darkness creeping in, the slow decline, the unexplained disappearances, the growing sense of dread. And I saw his horror as his wife and children were taken, as he was silenced, as he was forced to watch his town die. The images vanished as quickly as they had come, leaving me breathless and shaken. I understood now. The fisherman was trapped in Port Sorrow, a prisoner of its darkness, but he wanted to escape just like me, and he was offering me his help. He pointed to the boat, then to the horizon. Then he pointed to the carving in my hand. He was telling me to take the boat, to use it to escape to Avalon. He was giving me his blessing. Tears welled up in my eyes. I had found an ally in this forsaken place, a fellow sufferer who understood my plight. "Thank you," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Thank you." The fisherman smiled, a sad, gentle expression that transformed his face. He nodded, then turned and walked towards the edge of the dock. He stood there for a moment, silhouetted against the fog, then stepped off the edge and into the water. I rushed forward, horrified. "No!" I cried, reaching out to save him. But it was too late. He sank beneath the surface, disappearing without a trace. I stared at the water, my heart aching with grief and despair. He was gone, another victim of Port Sorrow. But his sacrifice had given me hope. I turned to the boat, my resolve renewed. It was rickety and old, but it was seaworthy, and it was my only chance. I climbed aboard, feeling the weight of the fisherman's gift, the responsibility to honor his memory. The boat was small and cramped, filled with the smell of old wood and decaying fish. The sails were torn, but I managed to patch them up as best I could. The oars were heavy and awkward, but I knew I would need them. As I prepared to set sail, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, my hand reaching for the silver knife. Standing on the dock was the woman from the church, her eyes burning with madness, her lips sewn shut. She raised her arms and let out another silent scream, a sound that seemed to shatter the very air around me. I knew that she was there to stop me, to drag me back to Port Sorrow, but I was not afraid. I had a mission, a purpose, and the spirit of the fisherman to guide me. I turned to the sails, closed my eyes, let the sea guide my path, and I raised the sail. Chapter 10: Sea of Whispers and the Crimson Tide. The small boat, its weathered hull groaning in protest, cut through the churning waves as I finally left Port Sorrow behind. The woman's silent scream, however, continued to reverberate in my mind, a chilling reminder of the town's tormented souls. The fog, thick and cloying, clung to the coastline, obscuring the decaying buildings and the docks where the fishermen had disappeared. I shivered, not entirely from the cold. As the town receded into the mist, the whispers intensified, weaving themselves into the sounds of the wind and the waves. They spoke of impending storms, of monstrous creatures lurking beneath the surface, of the futility of my quest. They painted vivid images of the boat sinking, of me drowning in the icy water, of my soul being dragged down to join the tormented inhabitants of Port Sorrow. I fought back, focusing on the fisherman's sacrifice, on his silent plea for freedom. I clutched the black stone, its cold surface a tangible reminder of Ilara's protection. I visualized the protective circle, expanding it to encompass the boat, pushing back the encroaching darkness. The sea was rough, the waves tossing the boat from side to side. I had never sailed before, and I struggled to keep the boat on course, relying on instinct and a rudimentary understanding of navigation gleaned from old books. Hours passed and the coastline gradually disappeared. I was alone, surrounded by nothing but the vast expanse of the ocean and the ever-present fog. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, their influence becoming increasingly difficult to resist. I opened the Liber Tenebris, hopping for some guidance, but the pages remained blank. Frustration mounted, and the whispers seized the opportunity, suggesting that the book was useless, that I was wasting my time, that I should simply surrender to the darkness. As I stared at the blank pages, I noticed something strange. A faint image was beginning to appear, a shadowy outline of a compass. The needle was spinning wildly, unable to find its true north. The image grew clearer, more vivid, until it filled the entire page. I felt myself being drawn into the image, pulled towards the compass, towards the disorientation and uncertainty it represented. The boat began to spin, the waves crashing over the deck. The fog thickened, making it impossible to see anything. The whispers intensified, becoming a deafening roar. I realized that the keepers were trying to disorient me, to lead me astray, to make me lose my way. I had to resist, I had to focus, I had to find my true north. Closing my eyes, I took a deep breath and concentrated on the image of the compass. I focused on the needle, on its erratic movements, on the underlying force that was causing it to spin. I realized that the force was fear, my doubt, my uncertainty. The keepers were using my own emotions against me, amplifying them, distorting them to lead me away from Avalon. I had to conquer my fear. I had to trust my instincts. I had to find my inner compass. Taking another deep breath, I let go of my fear. I embraced the uncertainty, the chaos, the unknown. I surrendered to the journey, trusting that the universe would guide me. As I did, the image in the Liber Tenebris began to fade. The boat stopped spinning, the waves calmed, and the fog began to dissipate. The whispers grew quieter, their influence diminishing. I opened my eyes, feeling a renewed sense of clarity. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds, casting a golden light on the water. I could see the horizon, a clear line separating the sky from the sea. I looked at the compass in the boat. The needle was still spinning, but it was now moving more slowly, more deliberately. It was searching for its true north, but it was no longer being overwhelmed by fear. I understood now. The keepers could influence my emotions, but they couldn't control them. I had the power to choose my own path, to find my own way. I took the oars and began to row, following the direction of the compass. The sea was still rough, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced my fear, and I had emerged stronger. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The wind picked up, and the waves grew larger, threatening to capsize the boat. A storm was brewing. I knew that I had to find shelter, or I wouldn't survive the night. As darkness fell, a faint light appeared on the horizon. It was a beacon, a signal of hope in the midst of the storm. I rowed towards the light, my arms aching, my body exhausted. The boat was tossed about by the waves, but I refused to give up. As I got closer, I realized that the light was coming from a small island, a rocky, desolate island shrouded in mist. The whispers intensified, warning me to stay away, claiming that the island was cursed, that it was inhabited by monstrous creatures. But I ignored them, drawn by the promise of shelter, the hope of survival. I rowed towards the island, battling the waves, fighting against the wind. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I reached the shore. The island was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with the scent of salt and decaying seaweed. The rocks were sharp and jagged, and the waves crashed against them with a deafening roar. As I stepped onto the shore, I noticed something strange. The water around the island was turning red. Not just a faint tinge of red, but a deep crimson hue, as if the sea itself was bleeding. The whispers reached a fever pitch, screaming in my ears. The blood tide cometh, the blood tide cometh, doom is at hand. I stared at the crimson water, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers, for once, echoed the feeling in my soul. I knew with a chilling certainty that this island was not a haven. It was a nightmare, and I had just arrived. I could see the water turning red closer and closer. Now I have to fight something even more dangerous. Chapter 11: The Bleeding Isle and the Echoing Shanty. The crimson tide was a horrifying spectacle. The water around the island roiled and churned, the deep red color staining the rocky shoreline like fresh blood. The scent of brine was overwhelmed by a metallic tang, a smell that triggered a primal fear within me. The whispers, now a unified, deafening roar, chanted a single, ominous phrase: "The blood remembers, the blood demands." I stumbled back from the shore, my gaze sweeping across the island. It was small, perhaps a mile across, and dominated by a craggy, windswept hill. Twisted, skeletal trees clung precariously to the slopes, their branches reaching out like clawing fingers. The air was heavy, oppressive, as if the island itself was holding its breath. There was no sign of life, no indication of shelter, only rock, trees, and the crimson tide encroaching upon the shore. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I had sought refuge from the storm, only to find myself trapped on a bleeding island, haunted by unseen forces. The thought of returning to the boat, to the mercy of the turbulent sea, was equally terrifying. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. I had to find a way to survive, to understand the nature of this place, to escape, if that were even possible. Clutching the black stone, I began to explore the shoreline, searching for any sign of hope, any clue to the island's dark secrets. As I walked, I noticed something strange on the beach. Small, smooth stones, each painted with a single, crude symbol. They were scattered randomly across the sand, half buried in the crimson-stained seaweed. I picked one up, examining the symbol. It was a spiral, a shape that resonated with an ancient, primal energy. I recognized it from my studies of folklore and mythology. It represented the journey of the soul, the cyclical nature of life and death. I continued to walk, collecting more of the painted stones. Each had a different symbol: a circle, a triangle, a square, a star. Each symbol seemed to vibrate with its own unique power, its own hidden meaning. As I gathered the stones, I began to feel a strange connection to the island, a sense of understanding that transcended logic and reason. The whispers, though still present, seemed to soften, their tone shifting from menacing to informative. They began to whisper fragments of the island's history, of its dark past, a place of sacrifice, a refuge for outcasts, a prison for forgotten gods. The stones, I realized, were keys. Keys to unlocking the secrets of the bleeding island, keys to understanding the forces that controlled it. I continued to explore the shoreline, drawn by an unseen force towards the base of the craggy hill. The crimson tide was rising rapidly, cutting off my escape route, forcing me to move inland. As I approached the hill, I heard a sound, a faint, haunting melody carried on the wind. It was a song, a sea shanty, sung in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The shanty was slow and mournful, its lyrics filled with sorrow and longing. It spoke of lost loves, of shipwrecks and drownings, of the endless, unforgiving sea. The sound seemed to emanate from the hill itself, drawing me towards its dark, twisted trees. I hesitated, feeling a surge of fear. The shanty was unsettling, unnatural, a siren song luring me towards danger. The whispers urged me to turn back, to flee the island before it was too late. But I couldn't resist the pull of the music, the lure of the unknown. Driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, I began to climb the hill, following the sound of the echoing shanty. The ascent was treacherous, the rocks sharp and slippery, the trees clawing at my clothes. The wind howled through the branches, carrying the mournful melody and the chilling scent of decay. As I climbed higher, I noticed something strange etched into the rocks, intricate carvings, similar to the symbols on the painted stones. They were arranged in a circular pattern, forming a labyrinthine path that wound its way towards the summit. The path seemed to beckon me forward, promising answers, promising salvation. But I also sensed a darkness within it, a hidden danger that threatened to consume me. I continued to climb, following the carved path, feeling the weight of the island's history, the presence of its tormented souls. The crimson tide continued to rise, surrounding the island, isolating me completely. As I neared the summit, the shanty grew louder, more intense. The air grew colder and a sense of dread washed over me. I knew that I was approaching something significant, something powerful, something terrifying. Finally, I reached the summit. Before me, I saw the source of the music, a small stone shrine, its surface covered in moss and lichen. A single flickering candle burned within, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. Kneeling before the shrine was a figure, a tall, gaunt figure, shrouded in darkness, just like the keepers. But this figure was different. It was radiating an aura of immense power, a force that dwarfed anything I had encountered before. The figure slowly raised its head and turned to face me. It was a skeleton, its skull bleached white by the elements. Its eye sockets were empty, but I could feel its gaze piercing my very soul. The skeleton opened its mouth, and the echoing shanty poured forth, a song of sorrow and despair that seemed to shake the very foundations of the island. The whispers fell silent. I knew with a chilling certainty that this was the heart of the bleeding island, the source of its power, the master of its tormented souls. And I had just walked right into its lair. I stared at it for what seemed like an eternity as the tide got closer and closer. It was time to make a choice, and make it now. Chapter 12. The Siren's Bones and the Bargain of Blood. The skeletal figure, silhouetted against the flickering candlelight, radiated an aura of such profound power that it paralyzed me with fear. The echoing shanty, pouring from its jawless mouth, was more than just a song. It was a psychic assault, a wave of despair that threatened to shatter my sanity. The painted stones, clutched in my trembling hands, felt suddenly insignificant, powerless against this ancient, malevolent force. The crimson tide continued its inexorable rise, the blood-red water now lapping at the base of the hill, isolating the shrine and me within its bloody embrace. The whispers, silenced for a moment by the sheer force of the skeletal figure's presence, returned with renewed intensity, urging me to flee, to throw myself into the sea and embrace oblivion. But a part of me, the historian's curiosity, the thirst for knowledge that had driven me to Thorne Manor in the first place, refused to yield. I had come too far, endured too much, to simply surrender to fear. I had to understand this creature, to unravel the mystery of the bleeding island. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to speak, my voice barely a whisper against the mournful shanty. What are you?" The skeletal figure tilted its head, as if considering my question. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on its bleached white skull. The shanty continued unabated, a relentless tide of sorrow washing over me. Slowly, deliberately, the figure raised a skeletal hand, pointing towards the crimson water that surrounded the island. "I am the voice of the drowned," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers, an echo of countless souls lost at sea. "I am the memory of the forgotten. I am the blood that remembers." "The blood?" I asked, my mind racing. "What does the blood remember?" The figure lowered its hand, its empty eye sockets locking with mine. "The blood remembers the sacrifice," it said. "The blood remembers the pain. The blood remembers the bargain." "What bargain?" The figure leaned forward, its skeletal face inches from mine. The stench of decay was overwhelming, a sickening reminder of mortality. "The bargain made long ago," it whispered. "A bargain to appease the sea, to ensure safe passage, to grant prosperity. A bargain sealed in blood." I understood now. The bleeding island was a place of ancient sacrifice, a site where a pact had been made with some dark, primordial force to appease the sea. A pact that required a constant stream of blood to be maintained. "What happens if the bargain is broken?" I asked, my voice trembling. The skeletal figure smiled, a chilling, predatory expression that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "The sea demands its due," it said, "and the blood will have its vengeance." The crimson tide rose higher, lapping at the base of the shrine. The shanty intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The figure extended a skeletal hand towards me, its bony fingers beckoning me closer. "Join me," it whispered. "Become one with the blood, become the voice of the drowned, embrace the sacrifice." I recoiled, horrified. Was this what the keepers wanted? For me to become a vessel for this ancient evil, to perpetuate the cycle of sacrifice and despair? "I refuse," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I won't become a part of your bargain." The skeletal figure chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You have no choice," it said. "The sea has chosen you. The blood demands you." The figure raised its other hand, and the painted stones, clutched in my hands, began to glow with an eerie crimson light. The symbols on the stones seemed to writhe and twist, as if coming alive. I felt a searing pain in my hands, as the stones burned into my flesh, imprinting their symbols on my skin. The symbols began to spread, crawling up my arms, across my chest, consuming my body. I felt myself being transformed, becoming something else, something monstrous. The whispers returned, not as a chorus of conflicting voices, but as a single, unified command. "Serve the sea. Obey the blood." I fought back with all my might, struggling against the transformation, clinging to my sanity. I focused on Alara's teachings, on the cleansing power of the spring, on the warmth of the black stone. But it was no use. The power of the skeletal figure, the influence of the blood, was too strong. I was losing control, surrendering to the darkness. Then I remembered something Alara had said. Remember your family's history. I delved into my memories, searching for a clue, a weapon to use against this ancient evil. I remembered my grandfather's obsession with the occult, his studies of forgotten lore. I remembered the journals in Thorne Manor, filled with arcane rituals and forbidden knowledge. And then I remembered something specific, a ritual for banishing sea demons, a protection spell used by sailors to ward off storms and shipwrecks. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. Closing my eyes, I began to chant the words of the spell, my voice trembling but determined. From the depths of the ocean, from the fury of the storm, from the wrath of the sea, protect me. The skeletal figure recoiled, its eye sockets widening in surprise. The crimson light emanating from the stones began to dim. I continued to chant, my voice growing stronger, more confident. By the power of the earth, by the light of the sun, by the strength of my will, I banish thee. The symbols on my skin began to fade, their fiery glow extinguished. The whispers grew weaker, their influence diminishing. Return to the depths from whence you came. Leave this island, leave this world, and trouble us no more. As I finished the spell, the skeletal figure let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the island. It stumbled backward, its skeletal frame crumbling into dust. The crimson tide receded, the blood-red water slowly returning to its normal blue hue. The shanty faded, replaced by the sound of the wind and the waves. I stood there, panting, my body trembling, the sweat dripping down my face. I had survived, but I knew that it was only a temporary victory. The power of the sea, the influence of the bargain, was still present on the island. I looked down at my hands. The painted stones were gone, their symbols erased from my skin. But I could still feel their power, their presence within me. I realized that I hadn't defeated the evil. I had merely contained it. And I knew that it would return, stronger than before. I had to leave this island. I had to escape the influence of the blood. But how? The crimson tide had receded, but the storm was still raging. The sea was still turbulent, the waves still threatening. I was trapped, stranded on a bleeding island, haunted by the echoes of ancient sacrifices, pursued by the forces of darkness. I looked towards the horizon, searching for a sign of hope, and then I saw it. A light, faint but persistent, flickering in the distance. It was a boat, sailing towards the bleeding island. Was it a rescue or a trap? I had no idea, but I had no choice. I had to take the risk. Because the alternative was to stay on this island, to become one with the blood, to embrace the sacrifice. And that was a fate worse than death. Now to wait and see if it is friend or foe that approaches. Chapter 13. The Ghost Ship and the Captain's Lament. The sight of the approaching vessel, a distant light bobbing against the turbulent waves, ignited a desperate spark of hope within me. But the whispers, ever present and insidious, immediately sought to extinguish it. They painted vivid images of a ghost ship, crewed by skeletal figures, sailing to claim my soul. They warned me that the island was a trap, and the boat was simply the means of my final, agonizing capture. Despite my fear, I knew I had no other option. Staying on the bleeding island meant certain doom, a slow and agonizing transformation into a vessel for the ancient evil that controlled it. I had to take the risk, to trust that the approaching vessel offered a chance of salvation, however slim. As the boat drew closer, its details began to emerge from the storm-tossed sea. It was a schooner, a two-masted sailing vessel, its lines graceful despite its age and evident disrepair. Its sails were patched and torn, its hull encrusted with barnacles, its decks weathered and stained by countless voyages. It had the look of a ship that had seen a great deal of hardship, a vessel that had weathered countless storms. But it was also strangely silent. There were no sounds of human activity, no shouts from the crew, no creaking of rigging. Only the mournful sigh of the wind and the crash of the waves against its hull. As the schooner neared the island, it began to circle, its movements slow and deliberate, as if searching for a safe anchorage. A rope ladder was lowered over the side, inviting me to climb aboard. I hesitated, my hand gripping the black stone, my mind racing. Was this a rescue or a trap? Were the whispers right? Was this ship a vessel of the damned, sailing to claim my soul? I studied the ship, searching for any sign of danger, any indication of its true nature. But I saw nothing. Only the storm-tossed vessel, its silent presence a stark contrast to the roaring waves and the haunting cries of the wind. Driven by desperation and a sliver of hope, I made my decision. I would take the risk. I would climb aboard the schooner and face whatever awaited me. I ran towards the rope ladder, battling the wind and the waves. The island's rocky shoreline was treacherous, and I stumbled several times, nearly losing my footing. But I pressed on, driven by the need to escape the bleeding island. Reaching the ladder, I began to climb, my muscles aching, my hands raw from gripping the rough rope. The boat pitched and rolled, making the ascent difficult and dangerous. As I climbed higher, I could see the deck of the schooner more clearly. It was deserted. There was no one there to greet me, no one to offer assistance. The whispers intensified, urging me to turn back, warning me that I was walking into a trap. But I ignored them, driven by a sense of grim determination. Finally, I reached the top of the ladder and hauled myself onto the deck. I collapsed, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The deck was deserted, just as I had suspected. The air was cold and damp, thick with the smell of salt and decay. The only sound was the creaking of the ship and the mournful sigh of the wind. I stood up cautiously and began to explore the ship. The deck was cluttered with debris, broken barrels, torn sails, and scraps of rotting rope. The ship was clearly in a state of disrepair, neglected and forgotten. I made my way towards the helm, hoping to find someone, anyone in control of the vessel. But the helm was deserted, the wheel spinning freely in the wind. I continued to search, exploring the cabins below deck. They were dark and damp, filled with the stench of mildew and decay. The furniture was broken, The walls were stained, and the air was thick with dust. There was no sign of life. The ship was a ghost, sailing without a crew. Then I heard a sound, a faint, mournful melody drifting from the depths of the ship. It was the same shanty I had heard on the bleeding island, a song of sorrow and despair. Driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I followed the sound, descending deeper into the ship. I passed through a series of dark and narrow corridors, my hand tracing the damp, rotting walls. Finally, I reached a door at the end of the corridor. The shanty was louder here, more intense. I could feel the vibrations of the music resonating through my body. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. What awaited me on the other side? What horrors would I find in the depths of this ghost ship? Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was small and dimly lit, illuminated by a single, flickering candle. The air was thick with the scent of incense and decay. Seated at a table in the center of the room was a figure. A tall, gaunt figure, dressed in a tattered captain's uniform. The figure raised its head and turned to face me. It was a ghost. His face was pale and translucent, his eyes hollow and empty. His skin was decaying, revealing glimpses of bone beneath. He was the very image of death. The captain opened his mouth, and the echoing shanty poured forth, a song of sorrow and despair that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ship. I knew with a chilling certainty that this was the captain of the ghost ship, the master of its tormented souls. And I had just walked right into his lair. For a second the wind picked up and then stopped, and the song stopped. I clutched the smooth black stone and waited. I was definitely not in Kansas anymore. Chapter 14. The Captain's Tale and the Chart of Lost Souls. The ghostly captain, his translucent form flickering in the candlelight, exuded an aura of profound sorrow and weariness. The echoes of the shanty hung in the air, a palpable weight of loss and despair. Despite the fear that gripped me, I felt a strange sense of pity for this spectral figure, this tormented soul trapped within the confines of his decaying vessel. The whispers, though still present, were subdued, as if even they were awed by the presence of the captain. They no longer urged me to flee, but instead whispered fragments of his story, snippets of his past life. A proud captain, a loving husband, a skilled navigator. The captain stared at me, his hollow eyes filled with a bottomless sadness. He raised a spectral hand, gesturing towards a chair opposite him at the table. Hesitantly, I sat down. The chair creaked ominously, as if protesting my presence. The captain remained silent for a moment, studying me with his ghostly gaze. Then he spoke, his voice a mournful whisper, an echo from beyond the grave. "You seek Avalon," he said, his words laced with a weary resignation. "A fool's errand, I fear, but one I can, perhaps, aid you in." I was surprised. I had expected hostility or at least indifference, but the captain seemed almost helpful. "You know about Avalon?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The captain nodded, his spectral head bobbing slowly. "I have sailed these waters for centuries," he said. "I have seen things you cannot imagine. I have glimpsed the shores of Avalon, but I have never been able to reach them. Why not? The captain sighed, a sound like the wind whistling through the rigging of a ghost ship. I am cursed, he said, bound to this vessel, doomed to sail the seas for eternity, a price for my ambition, for my greed. He gestured towards a large, ornately framed chart hanging on the wall behind him. The chart was old and faded, its details obscured by time and wear. But as I looked closer, I realized that it was unlike any map I had ever seen. It was a chart of lost souls. Each dot on the map represented a soul lost at sea, a life claimed by the ocean's unforgiving depths. The dots were clustered around shipwrecks, treacherous currents, and haunted islands. The map was a tapestry of sorrow, a testament to the sea's endless capacity for destruction. "This is my burden," the captain said, his voice filled with despair. "To guide these lost souls, to offer them solace, to carry them to their final resting place." "But you can't leave the ship," I said, understanding dawning. "No," the captain replied. "I am bound to this vessel as they are bound to me. We are all prisoners of the sea." "So you can't help me reach Avalon," I said, my hope dwindling. The captain shook his head slowly. "Not directly," he said, "but I can offer you guidance. I can show you the way, but I cannot sail you there." He gestured towards the chart. "This map," he said, "contains the knowledge you seek. It shows the hidden currents, the treacherous reefs, the haunted islands that lie between here and Avalon. It reveals the paths that are safe and the paths that lead to certain doom." "But the map is so old," I said, "and so difficult to read." "Its age is its strength," the captain said. "The sea does not change. Its currents shift, its storms rage, but its underlying nature remains constant. This map reflects that constancy. It shows the true face of the ocean, the face that is hidden from mortal eyes." He stood up, his spectral form shimmering in the candlelight. He walked towards the chart and traced a path with his finger, a winding course through the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. "Follow this path," he said. "Avoid the marked areas. Heed the warnings of the wind and the waves, and perhaps, just perhaps, you may reach Avalon." I stared at the chart, memorizing the route. It was a long and perilous journey, fraught with danger, but it was also my only hope. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "What do you want in return?" The captain turned to face me, his hollow eyes filled with a profound longing. "I want freedom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I want to be released from this curse, to be reunited with my loved ones in the afterlife." "But how can I help you?" The captain pointed towards the black stone, still clutched in my hand. "That stone," he said, "is a key to unlocking the power that binds me to this ship, a key to releasing me from this curse." "But how do I use it?" The captain hesitated. "The ritual is dangerous," he said. "It requires a sacrifice, and there is no guarantee that it will work." "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked, my heart sinking. The captain looked at me, his eyes filled with sadness. "A sacrifice of memory," he said. "You must surrender a part of yourself, a precious memory, to the sea. Only then can you break the curse and release me from my prison. A sacrifice of memory. The words echoed in my mind, filling me with dread. Was I willing to pay such a high price for my freedom, for a chance to reach Avalon? Was I willing to sacrifice a part of myself to appease the sea? The ghosts of Port Sorrow, the keepers, the black roses, all demanded a sacrifice. The sea was no different. I had to make a decision, but I knew deep down that I didn't have all the time in the world to make it. Now, which memory should I sacrifice, and more importantly, which memories could I even afford to lose? The black stone started to get warmer now. Chapter 15. The Price of Passage and the Fading Photograph. The captain's request hung heavy in the air, a spectral demand that resonated with the haunted atmosphere of the ghost ship. The whispers, sensing my inner turmoil, swirled around me, painting vivid images of fragmented memories, lost identities, and the irreversible consequences of sacrificing a piece of myself. Yet, the possibility of freeing this tormented soul, of lifting the curse that bound him to this vessel, tugged at my conscience. And more importantly, his help in reaching Avalon was the only lead I had left. The warmth emanating from the black stone intensified, as if urging me to make a decision, to embrace the sacrifice, to break the cycle of pain and suffering that permeated this spectral realm. I looked at the chart of lost souls, its countless dots representing lives extinguished by the unforgiving sea. Each one a story, a tragedy, a testament to the ocean's power. Could I, in good conscience, refuse to help the captain, knowing that his knowledge might save me from a similar fate? What kind of memory? I asked, stalling for time, desperately searching for a way to mitigate the cost. Does it have to be a happy one, a significant one, or will any memory do? The captain's spectral form shimmered, as if struggling to maintain its solidity. The memory must be precious to you, he said, his voice a mournful whisper. It must be something you cherish, something that defines who you are. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the power to break the curse. His words sent a chill down my spine. He was asking me to relinquish something essential, something that formed the very foundation of my identity. Was I willing to pay such a price for my freedom, for a chance to reach Avalon? What if the memory I chose held a clue, a key to unlocking the mysteries of Thorne Manor, of the keepers, of the Liber Tenebris? The whispers, sensing my hesitation, intensified their assault, tempting me with promises of power, of knowledge, of a blissful oblivion free from pain and sorrow. All I had to do was surrender, to embrace the darkness, to sacrifice a memory and become one with the sea. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the whispers, to focus on the task at hand. I had to choose a memory, and I had to choose wisely. But how could I possibly decide what was worth sacrificing? Every memory, no matter how small or insignificant, contributed to the tapestry of my life. To tear one away would leave a hole, a void that could never be filled. Then I remembered something. A photograph tucked away in a box in my childhood bedroom. A faded image of my parents, smiling and holding hands, standing on a beach at sunset. It was taken shortly before their accident, a rare moment of joy captured in time. The photograph wasn't just an image, it was a symbol a symbol of love, of happiness, of the life that had been stolen from me. It was a reminder of what I had lost and what I longed to regain. The whispers screamed in protest, urging me to choose something else, something less significant. But I ignored them, drawn by the power of the photograph, by its connection to my deepest emotions. It was the perfect sacrifice. Opening my eyes, I looked at the captain, my resolve firm. "I have chosen my memory," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging within me. "The photograph of my parents." The captain nodded, his ghostly eyes filled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. "Then we must begin the ritual," he said. He instructed me to place the black stone on the table and to hold the photograph in my hands. He then began to chant in a language I didn't understand, but somehow recognized. It was the same language I had heard on the bleeding island, the language of the sea, the language of sacrifice. As the captain chanted, the candle flickered violently, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air grew cold, and a sense of dread washed over me. The whispers intensified, their voices merging into a single, deafening scream. I stared at the photograph, memorizing every detail. My mother's radiant smile, my father's gentle gaze, the golden light of the setting sun. I tried to imprint the image on my mind, to preserve it for eternity. Then, with a deep breath, I closed my eyes and surrendered the memory to the sea. I felt a sharp pain in my head, as if a piece of my brain was being torn away. The photograph dissolved in my hands, turning to ash. The captain's chanting reached a fever pitch, and the ship began to shake violently. The memory of my parents, of their love, of their happiness, began to fade. Their faces grew blurry, their voices distant, their presence ethereal. The pain was excruciating, but I held on, clinging to the belief that this sacrifice would be worth it. Finally, the chanting stopped. The ship fell silent. The pain subsided. I opened my eyes. The captain was gone. The candle had burned out. The room was plunged into darkness. I was alone. I reached for the black stone, but it was no longer on the table. It was gone, along with the memory of my parents. Had the ritual worked? Had I freed the captain from his curse? Or had I simply condemned myself to an eternity of darkness? I didn't know. I stood up, groping my way through the darkness. I had to get off this ship, to find my own way to Avalon. As I stumbled towards the door, I noticed something on the floor, a small wooden box. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was ornately carved, its surface covered in intricate designs. I opened the box. Inside, I found a chart. Not the chart of lost souls, but a different chart entirely. A chart of the stars. And scrawled across the top of the chart, in faded ink, were a single line of coordinates. My parents, my precious memory of them, was the answer all along. The answer to Avalon. My heart soared. Despite the pain, despite the loss, I had succeeded. I had paid the price, and I had received my reward. I had a new chart and a new hope and a new path. I turned and walked towards the door, ready to face whatever awaited me on the other side. The coordinates were my path. Chapter 16. Starlight Navigation and the Siren's Call. The small wooden box containing the star chart felt like a lifeline in the oppressive darkness of the captain's cabin. Emerging onto the deck of the ghost ship, I was greeted by a sky partially cleared, the storm clouds having retreated to reveal a breathtaking panorama of stars. The air was crisp and cold, and the wind, though still present, had diminished to a gentle breeze. The sea, though still turbulent, seemed less menacing, its waves shimmering with an ethereal, star-like glow. The coordinates on the chart were my guide, my compass, my only hope of reaching Avalon. I had no sextant, no chronometer, no traditional navigational tools. I would have to rely on my knowledge of astronomy, gleaned from dusty textbooks and late-night observations, to interpret the star chart and chart a course. The task was daunting, bordering on impossible. The stars, though beautiful, were also indifferent, their distant light offering no easy answers. The sea was unpredictable, its currents and winds constantly shifting, threatening to carry me off course. And the whispers, though fainter than before, still lingered, preying on my doubts and fears, tempting me to abandon the quest. But I refused to yield. I had sacrificed a precious memory, paid a heavy price for this opportunity. I would not squander it. Taking a deep breath, I unfurled the star chart and began to study it, trying to match the patterns of stars on the chart with those visible in the night sky. It was slow and painstaking work, requiring intense concentration and a steady hand. The boat pitched and rolled, making it difficult to keep my bearings. The cold seeped into my bones, numbing my fingers and clouding my thoughts. Hours passed, and the night sky slowly began to shift. Familiar constellations rose and set, their positions changing with the passage of time. I used the North Star, Polaris, to determine my latitude, and the angle of the Big Dipper to estimate my longitude. Gradually, a course began to emerge, a path that led westward towards the setting sun, towards the unknown. I took the helm, gripping the wheel tightly, and began to steer the ghost ship in the direction of Avalon. The sails billowed in the wind, and the boat surged forward, cutting through the waves with a newfound sense of purpose. As I sailed, I noticed something strange in the distance. A light, faint but persistent, flickering on the horizon. It was similar to the light I had seen on the Bleeding Island, a beacon beckoning me towards the unknown. The whispers intensified, their voices taking on a seductive tone. They spoke of a safe harbor, of a warm welcome, of a respite from the storm. They urged me to follow the light, to trust its guidance, to abandon my carefully charted course. I hesitated, torn between my trust in the star chart and the lure of the distant light. Was it a sign of hope or a trap? The light grew brighter, more alluring. It seemed to pulse with a hypnotic rhythm, drawing me towards it with an irresistible force. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, their voices merging into a single siren song. I knew that I was being tested. The sea, the keepers, whatever forces were at play, were trying to lead me astray, to lure me away from Avalon. I had to resist. I had to trust my instincts, to rely on the knowledge I had gained. Closing my eyes, I took a deep breath and focused on the star chart. I visualized the constellations, the patterns of stars, the coordinates that guided my way. I remembered the captain's warning, Heed the warnings of the wind and the waves. The wind was picking up, the waves were growing larger. The sea was warning me to stay on course, to resist the temptation of the light. Opening my eyes, I gripped the wheel tighter and steered the boat away from the light, back towards my intended path. The whispers screamed in protest, their siren song turning into a chorus of curses and threats. The light flickered violently, then vanished completely. I sailed on, into the darkness, trusting that I had made the right decision. Hours passed and the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The storm had completely subsided and the sea was calm and peaceful. As the sun climbed higher, I saw something in the distance, a shape on the horizon, a landmass shrouded in mist. It was an island. As I drew closer, the island's details began to emerge from the mist. It was lush and green, covered in trees and flowers. The air was sweet with the scent of blossoms and herbs. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. The whispers fell silent. I knew with a chilling certainty that this was Avalon. But something was wrong. The island seemed wrong. There was no sign of life, no sound of birds singing, no movement of animals, only silence. And as I drew closer, I saw something else. Something horrifying. The shores of the island were lined with bones. Human bones. Skulls, ribs, femurs, piled high like driftwood. The water around the island was stained red. Not with blood, but with something else. Something metallic. The light, the lure, all a clever ruse. The sirens are real. Chapter 17. The Bone Shore and the Corrupted Avalon. The sight that greeted me as the ghost ship approached the shores of Avalon was a grotesque parody of paradise. The vibrant greenery, the sweet-smelling air, the promise of sanctuary, all were overshadowed by the horrifying reality of the bone-strewn beaches and the metallic red-stained waters. The silence, once a sign of peace, now resonated with an ominous emptiness, a void where life should have thrived. The whispers, which had been silenced by the anticipation of arrival, returned with a vengeance, their voices laced with malice and triumph. Welcome to Avalon, Thorne. Your journey ends here. Join us in our eternal slumber. A chilling realization dawned upon me. This was not the Isle of Avalon of legend, the sanctuary of healing and enlightenment. This was a corrupted Avalon, a twisted reflection of its former glory, a place where hope had been replaced by despair, and life had been consumed by death. Despite the terror that gripped me, I knew I couldn't turn back. I had come too far, sacrificed too much. I had to discover what had happened to this island to understand the source of its corruption, and perhaps, just perhaps, to find a way to restore it to its former glory. With a deep breath, I steered the ghost ship towards the bone-strewn shore, carefully navigating through the treacherous reefs that guarded the island. As the boat drew closer, I noticed something moving on the beach. Figures. Human figures, but twisted and distorted, their bodies emaciated, their skin pale and translucent. They shuffled aimlessly along the shore, their eyes hollow and empty, their movements jerky and unnatural. They were the inhabitants of this corrupted Avalon. the victims of whatever dark force had overtaken the island. The whispers intensified, urging me to join them, to surrender to the emptiness, to become one with the bone shore. I ignored them, focusing on the task at hand. As the boat grounded on the sand, I grabbed my bag and jumped ashore, determined to confront whatever awaited me on this cursed island. The figures on the beach turned to face me, their gaunt faces contorted into grotesque smiles. They began to shuffle towards me, their movements slow and deliberate, their eyes burning with a cold, unholy light. I drew the silver knife, its blade gleaming in the sunlight. The figures hesitated, their advance momentarily stalled. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to hurt you." The figures ignored my warning and continued to advance, their grotesque smiles widening. I knew that I couldn't reason with them, that they were beyond help. They were puppets, controlled by whatever dark force had taken hold of this island. I had to defend myself. With a cry of defiance, I charged forward, slashing at the figures with the silver knife. The blade sliced through their emaciated bodies with ease, but they seemed to feel no pain. They simply kept coming, their relentless advance unwavering. I fought with a desperate ferocity, dodging their grasping hands, parrying their clumsy attacks. The battle was exhausting, both physically and mentally. The whispers continued their relentless assault, trying to break my will, to force me to surrender. Just when I thought I could no longer continue, I saw something in the distance. A structure, nestled amongst the trees on the slopes of a small hill. It was a building of some kind, its architecture ancient and imposing. Hope surged through me. Perhaps the building held answers, a clue to the source of the island's corruption. I had to reach it. Ignoring the figures that surrounded me, I turned and ran towards the building, dodging their grasping hands, leaping over the piles of bones that littered the beach. The figures pursued me, their movements surprisingly swift. I could hear their shuffling footsteps behind me, their hollow groans echoing through the air. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my legs aching. The building seemed to recede before me, its distance ever increasing. Just when I thought I would be overtaken, I reached the edge of the beach and plunged into the trees. The darkness of the forest offered some concealment, but the figures were still close behind. I ran through the trees, dodging branches and leaping over fallen logs. The forest floor was uneven and treacherous, and I stumbled several times, nearly falling. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They urged me to give up, to surrender to the island's darkness. But I refused to listen. I had a destination in mind, a goal to achieve. I would not be deterred. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I reached the building. It was a temple built of massive stones, its surface covered in moss and lichen. Its entrance was a dark and gaping maw, promising nothing but darkness and despair. The figures emerged from the trees, surrounding the temple, their eyes burning with a cold, unholy light. I knew that I was trapped. The temple was my only hope, but it was also a potential death trap. With a sigh of resignation, I turned to face the figures, ready to make my final stand. But then, something unexpected happened. The temple doors began to open. Slowly, deliberately, revealing a figure standing within. A figure shrouded in light. A figure that seemed to radiate power and peace. The whispers fell silent. The figures on the bone shore hesitated. I stared, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this a salvation or another siren's call? Chapter 18: The Luminary and the Temple of Lost Hope. The figure standing in the doorway of the temple was bathed in an ethereal glow, a beacon of light in the surrounding darkness. It was tall and slender, clad in flowing white robes, its face obscured by a hood. Its presence radiated an aura of profound peace and serenity, a stark contrast to the twisted and tormented figures that surrounded me. The whispers, which had been a constant presence since arriving on the island, fell silent, as if awed by the figure's power. The corrupted inhabitants of Avalon, their advance momentarily halted, shuffled uneasily, their eyes averted from the luminary. Was this a savior, a benevolent guardian of this corrupted isle, or another illusion, a carefully crafted trap designed to lure me further into the heart of darkness? I had learned to trust nothing, to question everything. Yet, the desperate hope that flickered within me yearned to believe in the sincerity of this figure, in the possibility of redemption. The luminary raised a hand, beckoning me towards the temple. "Enter, traveler," the figure said, its voice soft and melodious, yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "You have endured much, and your journey is far from over. But within these walls you may find answers and perhaps even solace." Hesitantly, I stepped forward, leaving the corrupted inhabitants of Avalon behind. As I approached the temple entrance, the luminary stepped aside, allowing me to pass. The interior of the temple was surprisingly serene, a stark contrast to the desolate landscape outside. The air was warm and still, filled with the scent of incense and wild flowers. The walls were lined with intricate carvings, depicting scenes of nature, of healing, of spiritual enlightenment. The luminary followed me inside, its flowing robes rustling softly on the stone floor. As the figure turned to face me, it lowered its hood, revealing its face. It was a woman, her features delicate and serene, her eyes a clear, luminous blue. She was ancient, her skin etched with the wisdom of ages, but her gaze was youthful and vibrant, filled with compassion and understanding. "Welcome, Elias Thorne," she said, her voice gentle and reassuring. "I have been expecting you." "You know my name?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know much about you, Elias," she said. "About your family, about Thorne Manor, about the burden you carry." "Then you know why I'm here," I said. "I'm searching for Avalon, but this isn't it. This is a nightmare." The woman nodded, her expression filled with sadness. "This island was once a sanctuary, a place of healing and enlightenment. But a great darkness has fallen upon it, corrupting its beauty, twisting its inhabitants into shadows of their former selves." "What happened?" I asked. The woman sighed, her gaze drifting towards the temple carvings. "A long time ago, a powerful artifact was brought to this island, a relic of immense power, capable of both great good and terrible evil. It was meant to be protected, to be studied, to be used for the benefit of all. But it wasn't, I said, completing her sentence. No, the woman said. It fell into the wrong hands. A group of power-hungry individuals, driven by greed and ambition, sought to harness the artifact's power for their own selfish purposes. They performed dark rituals, desecrated sacred sites, and unleashed forces that they could not control. And that's what corrupted Avalon, I said. Yes, the woman said. The artifact's power was too great, too dangerous. It twisted the island's natural energies, poisoning its land, corrupting its inhabitants. And now it threatens to spread its influence to the rest of the world. Can it be stopped? I asked, my voice filled with desperation. The woman looked at me, her eyes filled with hope. Yes, Elias, it can be stopped, but it will require courage, sacrifice, and a willingness to confront the darkness within yourself. What do I have to do? The woman smiled, a warm and gentle expression that banished all my doubts. You must find the artifact, she said, and you must destroy it. Where is it? I asked. The woman pointed towards a doorway at the far end of the temple. It lies deep within this temple, she said, in a chamber known as the Heart of Darkness. What's in there? The woman hesitated. The chamber is guarded by powerful illusions, she said. It will test your mind, your body, and your spirit. You will face your greatest fears, your deepest insecurities, and you will be tempted to surrender to the darkness. Will I succeed? I asked. The woman smiled. That, Elias, depends on you. But know this, you are not alone. The spirits of those who once lived on this island are with you. They will guide you, protect you, and give you strength. She placed her hand on my shoulder, her touch sending a surge of energy through my body. Go now, Elias Thorne, your destiny awaits. With a deep breath, I turned and walked towards the doorway, ready to face whatever horrors lay in the heart of darkness. I closed my eyes to picture my parents' faces, and then walked into the inky blackness. Chapter 19. The Heart of Darkness and the Symphony of Fear. The doorway leading to the Heart of Darkness was more than just an entrance. It was a threshold, a gateway into a realm of shadows and illusions. As I stepped across it, the serene atmosphere of the temple vanished, replaced by a chilling sense of dread. The air grew cold and heavy, thick with the scent of decay and the faint echo of whispers, now malevolent and mocking. The corridor before me was shrouded in darkness, the only light emanating from faint, ethereal orbs that floated in the air, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The walls themselves were covered in grotesque carvings, depicting scenes of torture, despair, and unimaginable horrors. The floor was uneven and treacherous, littered with bones and broken fragments of what appeared to be ancient artifacts. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex of fear, preying on my deepest insecurities, amplifying my anxieties. They spoke of my failures, my weaknesses, my insignificance. They reminded me of my parents' death, of my grandfather's coldness, of my own inability to connect with others. They taunted me with the image of the corrupted Avalon, a testament to the futility of hope, the inevitability of despair. Ignoring the whispers, I pressed forward, determined to reach the heart of darkness. As I ventured deeper into the corridor, the illusions began to manifest. First, I saw my parents. They were standing before me, their faces gaunt and pale, their eyes filled with accusation. "It's your fault," they said, their voices hollow and accusing. "If you had been there, we would still be alive." The pain was excruciating, a wave of guilt and regret washing over me. But I knew that it was an illusion, a cruel manipulation designed to break my will. "You're not real," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "You're just a trick of the mind." The figures of my parents began to fade, their accusations replaced by a chorus of mocking laughter. Next, I saw my grandfather. He was sitting in his study at Thorne Manor, surrounded by books and artifacts, his face twisted with scorn. "You're a disappointment, Elias," he said, his voice cold and contemptuous. "You'll never be a Thorne. You're too weak, too sentimental. You'll never unlock the secrets of the manor." His words stung, echoing the doubts that had plagued me throughout my life. But I knew that it was an illusion, a reflection of my own insecurities. "You're wrong," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I am a Thorne, and I will unlock the secrets of the manor, but I will use them for good, not for evil." The figure of my grandfather dissolved, replaced by a swirling vortex of darkness. As I continued to press forward, the illusions grew more intense, more personal. I faced my greatest fears, my deepest insecurities, my darkest desires. I was tempted to surrender to the darkness, to embrace the oblivion that it offered. But I refused. I clung to the memory of the luminary, to the hope of restoring Avalon, to the belief that I could overcome the darkness within myself. Finally, I reached the end of the corridor. Before me was a large, circular chamber, its walls lined with mirrors, each reflecting a distorted image of myself. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur, and the sound of whispers had grown into a deafening roar, a symphony of fear and despair. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal upon which rested the artifact. It was a small obsidian sphere, pulsating with a dark, malevolent energy. The sphere seemed to radiate a sense of power, of control, of ultimate dominance. The corrupted inhabitants of Avalon were here, shuffling aimlessly around the chamber, their eyes fixated on the sphere. They seemed to be drawn to it, compelled to worship its dark power. I knew that I had reached the heart of darkness. This was it, the moment of truth, the culmination of my journey. I had to destroy the artifact. But how? I had no weapons, no magic, no special abilities. All I had was my will, my courage, and my belief in the possibility of hope. As I stood there, overwhelmed by the power of the artifact, I heard a voice, a familiar voice, whispering in my ear. "Elias," the voice said, "you can't do this alone, you need help." I turned around, searching for the source of the voice, and then I saw them. The spirits of those who had once lived on this island. They were translucent figures, radiating a gentle light, their faces filled with sorrow and compassion. They surrounded me, offering their support, their guidance, their strength. "We are with you, Elias," one of the spirits said. "We will help you." The spirits joined hands, forming a circle around me. They began to chant, their voices soft and melodious, creating a counterpoint to the symphony of fear that filled the chamber. As they chanted, I felt a surge of energy flowing through my body, a sense of power and purpose that I had never experienced before. The spirits chanting seemed to dispel the illusions around me. The twisted reflections in the mirrors dissolved, replaced by images of hope and beauty. The scent of sulfur faded, replaced by the scent of wildflowers. The corrupted inhabitants of Avalon stopped shuffling and turned to face me, their eyes filled with a glimmer of recognition. I knew what I had to do. Drawing upon the power of the spirits, I raised my hand and focused my will on the obsidian sphere. I channeled all my energy, all my hope, all my belief into a single, focused beam of light. The beam struck the sphere, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. As the sphere shattered, the symphony of fear ceased. The darkness in the chamber dissipated, replaced by a blinding light. The corrupted inhabitants of Avalon were transformed, their twisted bodies returning to their natural forms, their eyes filled with life and Chapter 20: Rebirth of Avalon and the Uncharted Future. The shattering of the obsidian sphere unleashed a wave of pure, unadulterated light that banished the oppressive darkness from the heart of darkness. The twisted illusions dissolved, the symphony of fear ceased, and the corrupted inhabitants of Avalon transformed, their emaciated bodies regaining health and vitality, their hollow eyes sparkling with renewed life. The spirits that had aided me in my battle against the artifact began to fade, their translucent forms shimmering and dissolving into the air. They turned to me, their faces filled with gratitude and peace. "Thank you, Elias," one of the spirits said, her voice soft and melodious. "You have freed us from our prison. You have restored hope to Avalon." "What will happen to you now?" I asked. The spirit smiled. "We will finally be able to rest," she said, "to join our loved ones in the afterlife, to find peace." With a final nod, the spirits vanished completely, leaving me alone in the now cleansed chamber. The obsidian sphere was gone, reduced to a pile of harmless dust. The corrupted inhabitants of Avalon, now restored to their former selves, gathered around me, their faces filled with gratitude and awe. "Thank you," one of them said, a young man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "You have saved us. You have given us our lives back." "What happened to this place?" I asked. "What corrupted Avalon?" The young man sighed. "A long time ago," he said, "a group of travelers brought a strange artifact to our island. They claimed it was a source of great power, a tool for healing and enlightenment. But they were wrong. The artifact was a source of corruption, a magnet for darkness. It twisted our minds, poisoned our land, and turned us into monsters." "And the luminary?" I asked. "The woman who guided me here?" The young man smiled. "She is our protector, our guide, our hope. She has watched over us for centuries, waiting for someone who could break the artifact's power and restore Avalon to its former glory." "Where is she now?" The young man pointed towards the temple entrance. "She awaits you," he said. "She has something to tell you." I thanked the young man and walked towards the temple entrance. eager to speak to the luminary and learn more about this extraordinary island. As I emerged from the heart of darkness, I was greeted by a sight that took my breath away. The temple was bathed in sunlight, its stone walls gleaming with an ethereal glow. The trees around the temple were alive with bird song, and the air was sweet with the scent of wild flowers. The island had been transformed. The bone-strewn beaches were gone, replaced by pristine sand. The metallic red-stained waters had been cleansed, returning to their natural blue hue. The island was once again a paradise, a sanctuary of beauty and peace. The luminary was waiting for me at the entrance to the temple, her face radiant, her eyes filled with joy. "You have done it, Elias," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You have destroyed the artifact and restored Avalon to its former glory. You have proven yourself worthy." "What happens now?" I asked. "What is my destiny?" The luminary smiled. "That, Elias, is for you to decide," she said. "You have completed your quest. You have overcome your fears. You have proven your strength. Now you are free to choose your own path." She paused, her gaze becoming more serious. "But know this, Elias," she said. "The darkness is always lurking. It will always seek to corrupt and destroy. You must remain vigilant, and you must continue to fight for what is right." She reached into her robes and pulled out a small silver amulet. "Take this," she said. "It will protect you from harm, and it will guide you on your future journeys. But remember, its power is only as strong as your will to resist the darkness." I took the amulet, feeling its warmth in my hand. It was a tangible reminder of my time on Avalon, a symbol of hope and courage. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "I will never forget what I have learned here." The luminary smiled. "Go now, Elias Thorne," she said. "The world awaits you, and the future is yours to shape." With a final nod, I turned and walked towards the shore, ready to embark on my next adventure. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew that I was ready to face it. The ghost ship was still there, waiting for me at the edge of the shore. I climbed aboard, feeling a sense of gratitude for its service. It had carried me through treacherous waters, guided me through storms, and brought me to Avalon. I set sail, leaving the restored Isle of Avalon behind. As the island receded into the distance, I looked up at the sky, searching for the stars. They were there, shining brightly, guiding my way. I had lost my memory of my parents. I had faced my demons. I had been tested, tempted, and tried. I learned more than I ever thought possible, and my adventure will continue. I was Elias Thorne, and the world was my oyster. What do I do next? The end.